A cold wind swept down the city street as James stepped through the cafe door, the small bell above it tinkling softly. He pulled his coat tighter and glanced around the crowded room. The air smelled warm with fresh bread and strong coffee. Steam curled from the big metal urn behind the counter, and soft jazz music played just loud enough to fill the quiet pauses in conversation. James had come here every morning for 6 months. He liked the friendly chatter of baristas, the hiss of the espresso machine, and the way the early sunlight filtered through the tall windows onto wooden tables. This corner seat was his favorite. From here he could watch people come and go, see new faces, and feel part of a small, welcoming world. As he settled into the worn leather armchair at his table, James's eyes drifted to the counter. Stood there now, dressed in a neat gray coat and a light scarf. Her hair was tied back in a loose bun, and her posture looked tense. She fiddled with a small wallet, her fingers trembling slightly. For a moment, James wondered what had upset her. Maybe she was late for work, or worried about something important. The barista smiled kindly and asked for her payment. She lifted her card but hesitated, checking the machine's screen. When the voice on the machine said declined, her face turned bright red. James felt a quick jab of sympathy. He knew how it felt to have money worries. He had struggled through his own hard times not long ago. He remembered waiting tables at night to pay his rent and calling home to ask for help. He knew the shame of not having enough. He stood up and walked toward the counter, carefully making sure he did not draw too much attention. He did not want the woman to feel more embarrassed. He simply leaned forward and said in a low voice, "Let me take care of that coffee for you." The barista paused, surprised, then nodded. James handed over his card. The woman looked at him. With tears glimmering in her eyes, she managed a quiet thank you, her voice trembling. James smiled gently, shook his head, and said, "No problem. We all have days like this." He watched as she picked up her warm cup and smiled back. Then she slipped out the door before he could learn her name. James returned to his chair, his heart warm from the small kindness. He took a slow sip of his own latte and felt the rich, creamy taste spread through him. He imagined how heavy her worries must have felt in that moment, and he was glad he could help. He watched the door to see if she might come back, but she did not. Instead, people came and went. A young couple laughing quietly, an older man reading the newspaper, a group of students discussing homework. The cafe hummed with life. All day, James could not stop thinking about the woman. He wondered about her story. Did she work nearby, or was she just visiting? What had made her card decline? He knew banks sometimes flagged big purchases or thought something was wrong. Maybe she had a large mortgage payment coming through. Maybe she simply forgot to transfer money between accounts. He pictured her running late for a meeting, pulling her coat tighter against the cold, hoping no one noticed her trouble. James felt both proud that he helped and uneasy that he could not do more. That evening, he dreamed of the woman. In his dream, she sat next to him at the table, shared stories of their lives over coffee. He told her about teaching English, classes, and about his love for books. She talked about her busy days and her hidden passion for baking. They laughed and enjoyed the moment. When he awoke, he realized how simple acts of kindness could spark a connection. He resolved to return to the cafe the next morning, hoping once more to meet her. The next sunrise found James back in his armchair, arrived early, before the morning rush, and ordered his usual drink. He tucked into a small corner by the window. The sounds of early cars and distant footsteps drifted in. He sipped his coffee and opened his notebook, where he wrote bits of story ideas and sketches of people he met. He wrote about a woman with a warm smile and a sudden moment of shame. He wondered if she would appear again. When the cafe grew busier, he saw her. She paused at the counter, her eyes searching the room. Their gazes met. She gave a small nod, and he waved. She hesitated, then smiled softly and came over. James felt his heart race. He stood and said, "Morning." "I'm James." She said, "I'm Sarah." Their hands met in a brief handshake that felt warm and real. James noticed details he had missed before, a small silver ring on her finger, a leather briefcase beside her feet. Sarah thanked him again for the day before. She told him the machine had misread her card because of a bank hold, and she had been too embarrassed to try again. They talked for a few minutes. James learned Sarah worked just a few blocks away, and she often came here to start her day. Asked about his work, and he said he taught English at a local community center and sometimes wrote short stories. She asked for details about his favorite books, told her he loved simple tales of courage and ordinary people doing small good deeds. Sarah laughed and said those were her favorite stories too. As they talked, James noticed other patrons glancing at them. A cheerful barista came by with 2 fresh coffees on a small tray and set them on the table. Sarah offered to pay this time, but James insisted. She laughed and said, "You're good at this." He said helping people made his morning better too. She nodded, then asked if she could join him here once in a while. James felt hope rise in his chest. He said he would like that very much. Over the next hour, they shared details of their routine. Mornings. Sarah told him she oversaw several cafes in town and that sometimes technology let her down. She said she felt foolish when her card failed. James reassured her again that anyone could have a glitch, and kindness mattered more than perfect payment. He spoke about the moments when people had helped him during hard times. He said no one should feel alone or ashamed when something went wrong. Sarah listened closely. She seemed to relax as he spoke. She leaned back in her chair and looked out the window. James thought she seemed more confident than before. He felt proud of his small action and grateful for this unexpected friendship. When Sarah finished her coffee, she packed her things, and they walked out together into the crisp morning air. James offered to walk her part way, and she accepted. As they strolled down the street, they talked about the park ahead and weekend plans. James pointed out a favorite bench where he went to right when he needed quiet. Sarah thanked him again for being kind. He said he only did what any friend would do. Sarah smiled and slipped her hand lightly into his arm. James felt a warmth spread inside him. He realized a single moment of empathy had opened a door neither of them expected. That morning, as they parted ways, James felt lighter than he had in weeks. He watched Sarah's determined stride down the sidewalk and felt a quiet joy. He knew this was only the beginning of something special. All because he noticed one person in need and chose to help without hesitation. Each morning after that first chance meeting, James found himself walking the same familiar route to the cafe. The crisp air felt fresher now, carrying a small spark of hope. He arrived before sunrise, the street lamps still casting an orange glow on the pavement. As he pushed open the door, the gentle jingle of the bell felt like a warm invitation. He stuck to his usual routine, order a small black coffee, settle into his corner seat, and open his worn notebook to sketch the people around him. But every time he looked up, he scanned the room for Sarah's gray coat or her bright smile. On the second day, he arrived even earlier and caught the barista finishing a batch of cinnamon rolls. A sweet aroma filled the air. He wrapped both hands around his steaming cup and watched the door. But when the morning rush began, his hopes faded. The students with backpacks, the suited professionals on their phones, the mothers with strollers, all of them crowded the counter. No sign of Sarah. He told himself not to be discouraged, that she had to work. Her mornings might change some days. He sipped his coffee slowly, careful to taste every bittersweet note. On the third day, James arrived late. He had stayed up grading papers until midnight and slept through his alarm. He rushed in, breathless, expecting to miss her again. But to his surprise, there she was in line, looking over the menu board. His heart thumped. He sat up straighter and watched as she chose a latte this time. When she moved to pay, he caught her eye. She gave him a quick smile, and his breath caught in his throat. He decided to try something new today. Instead of waiting to be noticed, he walked to the counter and joined her line. When it was her turn, Sarah handed over her card with a polite nod to the barista. The transaction went through without a hitch. She turned, but before she could walk away, James stepped beside her and said, "Mind if I join you? I thought I'd try a latte too." She looked surprised for a moment, then laughed softly. "Sure," she said, and they moved to the side to wait together. The barista handed them their drinks on a shared tray. Their fingers brushed as they took their cups. James offered her his usual spot by the window. She accepted and carried her latte over to the table next to his. They sat side by side, the tall window showing the street waking up outside. A delivery truck rumbled past, and a pigeon fluttered across the pavement behind it. Sarah wrapped her hands around the warm cup and breathed in the foam's sweet smell. James felt his nerves settle as he spoke. "I'm sorry if I seem forward," he said. I've been hoping to see you again." Sarah's eyes softened. "No need to apologize," she said. "I've noticed you too. I was surprised by your kindness that day." She took a small sip and smiled. "I owe you a proper thank you." They drifted into conversation as if they had known each other longer than a few mornings. James told her about the writing group he led at the community center. He described the faces of his students: an elderly woman who remembered wartime stories, a young immigrant who was eager to learn English, a single father trying to improve his life. He spoke with genuine warmth, and Sarah listened closely, nodding. When he mentioned the shy boy who wrote poems, Sarah leaned forward. "That is wonderful," she said. "It sounds like you are changing lives with words." Sarah then shared a few details of her own. She said she had started her first cafe 5 years ago with a small loan. She painted a picture of long days and tough decisions, choosing a location, hiring good staff, and learning how to make the perfect espresso. As a shy young woman, she had never expected to build a business, but her passion for coffee drove her forward. She told him about a calf cup competition she had entered 2 years ago. Judges praised the smooth crema on her espresso, and she won second place out of many entries. James smiled, imagining her standing on a stage, holding a silver ribbon. He admired her drive. Their conversation flowed easily, touching on small joys and challenges. James described a stray cat that visited his apartment building every morning, meowing for scraps of tuna. He said he sometimes snuck a bit of his breakfast sandwich to the cat. Sarah laughed and said she once rescued a kitten tangled in a bush. Outside her cafe, she named it Mocha and sneaked it into the back office each night. She showed him a photo on her phone, a tiny gray kitten with big green eyes, curled up on a leather chair. Outside, the cafe grew busy. A group of friends entered, laughing loudly. The barista called out orders and the espresso machine hissed. With effort, yet James and Sarah barely noticed. They were caught in their own morning world, with cups of coffee and shared stories. Every so often, Sarah paused, gazing at James's notebook. He showed her a doodle of the cafe interior, complete with the counter, pastries, and the steaming urn. She laughed and said, "You captured it well." He blushed and said he often captured more on paper than in memory. After a while, James realized he had been talking for nearly an hour. He checked his watch and said, "I should get back to teaching soon." Sarah nodded. They stood and gathered their things. At the door, they paused in the cool air. Gentle breeze moved Sarah's scarf, and James thought the morning felt brighter than ever. Sarah turned to him and said, "Thank you for this. I almost skipped the cafe today, but I'm glad I didn't." James smiled and said, "Me too." And he added, "Maybe we can do this again sometime." She smiled back and said, "I'd like that." All week, James looked forward to those morning moments. Each day he arrived, hoping Sarah would join him. Some mornings she was busy with meetings. Other days she came in but sat elsewhere, catching up with the manager. Yet each time they met, they found new topics to explore. Favorite books, places they wanted to travel, even childhood memories. Sarah told him about her grandmother's cooking, and James spoke of his mother's garden they found comfort in. Sharing small details, discovering how much they had in common despite their different worlds. One morning, James arrived to find a small paper bag on his usual table. Inside was a freshly baked croissant and a note in neat handwriting for James from Sarah. "Thank you for your kindness." He felt a rush of warmth. The croissant was still warm and flaky. He took a bite, savoring the buttery layers. Glanced. At the door, a few moments later, Sarah appeared at the entrance. She waved and he waved back. He mouthed, "Thank you." She walked over, her smile wide. They sat together, enjoying the pastry and another round of coffee. That week, James noticed how Sarah's confidence seemed to grow. She spoke more freely, laughed more openly, and looked him in the eye without hesitation. He felt proud to see her stand tall. In turn, Sarah encouraged James to share his writing with a wider audience. She mentioned a local reading event at the community center and suggested he read one of his short stories there. James felt a tingle of excitement and fear at the idea. Sarah gave him an encouraging nod. "Your stories deserve to be heard," she said. Friday morning arrived, and with it came a gentle rain. James pulled on his coat and umbrella and hurried along the wet pavement. He slipped into the cafe, shaking off raindrops. Sarah was there, seated at his table with 2 coffees and a plate of cookies. He sank into the chair, grateful for the warmth. Outside, the rain tapped on the window in a steady rhythm. Inside, they talked about how rain made everything feel fresh. Sarah offered him a cookie dipped in chocolate. He took it and thanked her. They laughed when a drop of rain ran down the window, creating tiny rivers. As they finished their drinks, Sarah glanced at her watch. "I have an early meeting today," she said. James nodded, understanding. He gathered his notebook and pen. Before he stood, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small card. On it, he had written the time and date of the reading event, along with the community center's address. "I'd love it if you'd come," he said. Sarah looked touched. She folded the card and slipped it into her coat pocket. "I will be there," she promised. They left the cafe together into the cool, drizzly morning. James held the umbrella over both their heads as they walked. They paused at the corner where their paths diverged. Sarah thanked him again. He smiled and said, "I'll see you soon." She waved and crossed the street. James watched her until she turned the corner, then walked straight to the community center, notebook in hand and heart filled with anticipation. That week of small meetings had shown him how a simple act of kindness could grow into friendship and possibility. He felt more hopeful than ever for what tomorrow's cup of coffee might bring. James woke early that morning with a quiet excitement in his chest. He brushed his teeth, sipped water, and dressed in a neat shirt and jeans. He wanted to look presentable because today he had decided to share a secret that had been on his mind. He grabbed his notebook and headed out into the cool dawn air. The sun was just a thin line of pink on the horizon. He breathed in the crispness and felt ready for whatever the day might bring. When he reached the cafe, the bell tinkled as he pushed open the door. The barista greeted him by name and set his usual black coffee on the counter. He smiled his thanks and carried the mug to his favorite corner seat. It was still quiet, and the soft jazz music filled the space. He opened his notebook and sketched the steam rising from his cup, then stared into the swirl of dark liquid, lost in thought. Sarah arrived a few minutes later, walking in with her confident stride. She wore a smart blazer today, and her hair was loose around her shoulders. She scanned the room, spotted James, and waved. He stood and returned the wave, feeling a sudden warmth. Sarah carried a latte and an apple pastry, placing them carefully on the small table beside him. "Good morning," she said with a bright smile. "I brought something for you too." James looked surprised as she handed him a neat paper bag. He opened it to find a fresh croissant and a sticky note that read, "For James, thank you for being you." His heart fluttered at the kindness. He looked up at Sarah. "Thank you," he said. She shrugged and said, "You make my mornings better." He felt a rush of joy as he took a bite of the warm pastry. The butter melted on his tongue. He nodded and said, "I'm glad." Then he leaned back and prepared to share what lay on his mind. He closed his notebook and looked at Sarah. "There's something I've been meaning to ask," he began. "I've been so curious about your work. You mentioned you had started one cafe, but I have a feeling there's more to the story." Sarah paused, her eyes reflecting amusement. "You have good instincts," she said, stirring her latte. "Yes, I own a small chain of cafes, 5 in total around the city." James's eyes widened. 5. That's amazing," he said. "It's not as huge as it sounds," she replied. "I started small with one corner shop. Over time, I saved my earnings, found good partners, and opened for more. Each place has its own theme and menu. I really love bringing people comfort through coffee." James could hardly believe what he heard. The woman who had seemed so shy and kind was actually a successful business owner with a growing empire. As he tried to take it all in, Sarah continued, "But that's not all. I have other ventures too, an online bakery and a small design studio that creates our cafe menus and logos. She chuckled. When I'm not tasting new recipes, I'm designing posters or meeting with freelancers. James swallowed hard. The image of her fumbling with her card now seemed far from the full reality. He remembered how embarrassed she had looked. He cleared his throat. I didn't realize. I'm sorry if I ever treated you like someone less successful. Sarah shook her head quickly. Never apologize for kindness, she said softly. You saw someone in need and helped. It shows more than any bank balance. Her words settled his uneasy thoughts. He leaned forward. I feel foolish, he admitted. I wish I had known sooner. Sarah reached across the table and touched his hand. Don't be silly, she said. We all have moments when life surprises us. I was embarrassed about the card decline because I felt it gave the wrong impression. She smiled gently. But I learned something important. A quick act of kindness can matter far more than a business deal. Him, as he realized her humility matched his own kindness. They sat in silence for a moment, sipping their coffee. Outside, the city hummed to life buses, passing, people chatting at tables, the clink of cups. Inside, a sense of calm connection grew between them. James felt a bond of shared honesty. He decided to ask the question he had held back. Did you build all this your cafes and other businesses? Sarah's eyes lit up. She leaned back and took a slow breath. It wasn't easy, she said. I had no background in business. I had to learn everything on the go. I read books, talked to mentors, and even took evening classes on entrepreneurship. I made mistakes, bad hires, faulty equipment, wrong locations. But each mistake taught me something. I responded by trying again, improving, listening to customers, and adapting. She smiled. In many ways, it felt like writing a story where every chapter has its challenges and rewards. James nodded, fascinated. He thought of his own struggles teaching and writing. The path of learning and growing felt familiar to him. He realized how much courage it took for Sarah to share her story. He reached for his notebook, scribbled a quick diagram, showed it to her a series of steps labeled learn, apply, fail, improve, grow. Sarah leaned over his shoulder and laughed. That's exactly right, she said. You could use this as a guide for any new venture. James felt proud of his simple drawing. He closed the notebook and said, I think every story has its own map, Sarah agreed. And every map has room for kindness, she added. At that moment, the barista brought over 2 more drinks, this time without charge. The barista winked at James and said, On the house today, for our 2 favorite customers. James and Sarah exchanged surprised smiles. They thanked the barista. As she walked away, Sarah said, See? Kindness comes back around. They laughed together. James felt relaxed and happy. He realized how a simple mistake like a declined card had led to this rich conversation and deep connection. He felt grateful for his decision to speak up and ask about her life. As they finished their drinks, Sarah checked her watch and said, I need to head to a meeting now. James nodded and stood. Before they left, he handed her a small slip of paper. On it, he had written a link to his latest short story online. If you have time, he said, I'd be honored if you read it. Sarah smiled and slid the paper into her notebook. I will, she promised. They walked out together, pausing. At the door, James held it open for her. Outside, the morning sun was higher in the sky, bright and hopeful. Sarah thanked him again for the chat and the coffee. James told her it was his pleasure. They exchanged a friendly hug before going their separate ways. James watched her confident walk down the sidewalk. He felt changed by today's discovery, knowing her true success in sharing his own work. As he turned toward his next class at the community center, James felt a renewed sense of purpose. He thought of Sarah's words about kindness and growth. He promised himself to keep learning, keep helping, and to remember that every person has their own story beyond first impressions. His morning coffee ritual had become much more than a simple routine. It was now the start of a friendship built on honesty, respect, and genuine care. That day, James knew that small actions could lead to the most meaningful chapters of life. Sarah stepped into the cafe with the same calm confidence James had come to admire. The morning sunlight shone through the tall windows, casting warm light on the wooden floors. James looked up from his notebook and smiled when he saw her. Today the air felt different, lighter, full of promise. He closed his notebook and waved her over. Sarah carried her latte and placed it gently on the table. She sat down across from James and took a slow sip. A satisfied awe escaped her lips, and James laughed softly. He had learned that those little sounds spoke louder than words. He leaned forward and said, "I'm glad you made it today." Sarah's lips curved in a small smile. "I wouldn't miss it," she said. She brushed a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "I've been thinking about what you said last time, about stories and maps." James nodded, curious where she was going with this. "I realize that kindness is a map too," she continued. "It guides me when I'm unsure." James felt a warm glow. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out the folded flyer for his reading event. "So," he said, holding it out, "will you come tonight?" Sarah took the flyer and looked at it closely. She folded it and slipped it into her notebook. "I will," she promised. "I want to see your story brought to life." James's heart danced in his chest. They talked about the event for a while, how many people might come, what he would read, and where he would stand on the small stage. James admitted he felt a bit nervous. Sarah reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "Nerves mean you care," she said, "and that's a good thing." A hush fell over the cafe as the morning crowd began to thin. The barista, polishing cups at the counter, glanced their way and gave a friendly nod. James and Sarah sat in comfortable silence for a moment, enjoying their coffee and the quiet after the rush. Then James spoke, choosing his words carefully. "Sarah," he began, "I want to thank you again for sharing your story with me. When I learned who you really are, a successful entrepreneur with more projects than I ever imagined, I felt embarrassed." He paused, looking into his cup. She watched him with gentle eyes. "I thought I had somehow overstepped, or maybe that I treated you like someone less capable." Sarah's eyes softened. "James," she said, voice steady, "you saw a person in need and you helped. That's more valuable than any title or bank account. Our strengths and our vulnerabilities are both parts of who we are." She paused to take another sip of latte. "My card declined that day because of a simple bank hold, but it reminded me of how sometimes we forget how small acts of kindness can heal bigger wounds, like shame or loneliness." James nodded. He felt his embarrassment melt away. He realized that Sarah's humility shone even brighter than her success. He said, "I'm learning that kindness isn't just about giving. It's also about letting people see your real self, even your mistakes." Sarah smiled broadly. "Exactly," she said. "Mistakes connect us. They remind us we are human. And humanity lives in kindness." They talked about times they had felt ashamed, moments that made their chest tighten, and they had tried to hide. James told Sarah about the day he missed a rent payment and had to sleep on a friend's couch. He described the guilt of calling home to ask his parents for help. Sarah listened, her expression open and understanding. When James finished, Sarah reached into her bag and pulled out a small notebook. She opened to a page titled "Lessons from Declined Cards." With a playful grin, she read aloud, 1. Wealth does not define kindness. 2. Embarrassment can lead to connection. 3. A single gesture can change a life. James laughed. "You made notes?" he asked. She shrugged, smiling. "I like to learn from everything, even my own mistakes." James took her hand again and said, "I think that list belongs on a cafe wall." Sarah laughed and pretended to write a fourth lesson for always carry extra croissants. They both laughed, and the sound felt like a bell of joy in the quiet space. As their conversation deepened, the topic moved to dreams and hopes. Sarah confessed she still felt pressure to grow her business, to open new shops, and to balance her time. She worried she might lose the personal touch that made her cafes special. She asked James how he balanced teaching and writing. James thought for a moment. "I set small goals," he said. "I spend my mornings writing and my afternoons teaching. I try to give each part of my life its space. Sometimes I fail, like missing my alarm, but then I make up for it by showing up the next day." Sarah nodded thoughtfully. "I like that," she said. Small steps and forgiveness for ourselves when we slip. James realized she had internalized the same lesson he had been learning from her. He felt proud of her and of himself for growing together. They finished their coffee and looked at the clock. Sarah's eyes widened. "I almost forgot," she said. "I have a meeting in 30 minutes. James glanced at his notes and said, "I should head to the community center soon. But before we go, can I share something else?" Sarah leaned forward, interested. James took a deep breath and spoke. "I wrote a piece for my reading tonight about a man who helps a stranger in a cafe," he said. "It's based on the story of us." Sarah's eyes were bright. "Can I hear a bit now?" she asked softly. James nodded. He opened his notebook to a neatly written page. He cleared his throat and began to read. He saw her embarrassment and felt a tug at his heart. He rose without thinking, offered his hand to her, and let her know she was not alone. In that act, he discovered that kindness can bridge worlds. She, a woman with quiet strength beneath her gentle smile, a man whose giving heart brought warmth to the coldest morning. And together they found that the smallest gesture can open the door to friendship and perhaps more. When he finished, there was a moment of silence. Sarah's eyes shone with emotion. She reached across and touched his arm. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "You captured how I felt too." James felt joy like sunlight in his chest. "Thank you," he said quietly. They stood, gathering their things. Outside, the sun had climbed higher, and the day felt full of light. They walked to the door together. James held it open, and Sarah stepped through. The city seemed brighter now, as if reflecting their shared warmth. At the corner, they paused. Sarah looked at James and said, "You reminded me today why I started this journey. It's not just about business. It's about touching lives." James smiled and replied, "And you reminded me why kindness matters, that it's not a weakness, but a strength." They exchanged a warm hug before going their separate ways. Sarah's steps were sure, her heart lighter. James's shoulders felt relaxed, as if a weight had been lifted. Each carried a spark of the morning's connection with them. Made his way to the community center, thinking of his reading that evening. He felt confident and eager to share his words. He knew that no matter how many people came, he had already found something precious today. Friendship built on honesty, humility, and a shared belief in the power of small acts. Sarah returned to her office above the cafe. She placed her notebook on her desk next to her laptop. She read over her lessons from declined cards list and added a new line. 4. Friendship can grow from kindness and truth. She smiled, thinking of James's reading, and sent a quick message to her manager. "Please cover for me at the meeting tonight. I have something special to attend." As the day moved on, both James and Sarah carried the memory of their morning conversation. They felt more certain of themselves, more connected to each other, and more convinced that small moments like paying for a stranger's coffee could spark the most meaningful journeys. In their own worlds of teaching and entrepreneurship, they had found a shared map, one marked by kindness, understanding, and the courage to be real. And that map would guide them forward, wherever life led. James woke before dawn that next Saturday, felt a flutter of excitement in his chest. Today, he would meet Sarah at the community center. He dressed in a simple sweater and jeans, grabbed his notebook, and walked briskly through the quiet streets. The early light painted the sky soft pink, and the air smelled of dew and fresh hope. He reached the center just as the doors opened. Inside, volunteers bustled about, setting up tables and arranging chairs. James spotted Sarah near a stack of boxes. She wore a bright smile and greeted him with a wave. They stood among tables covered with colorful flyers and baskets of supplies. Today's program was Parent-Child Reading Hour, one of the community projects Sarah funded. Families would come here to share stories, learn new words, and enjoy time together. Sarah held up a stack of picture books. "Will you read the first story?" she asked. James nodded, feeling his heart skip a beat. He stepped forward and chose a book with bright illustrations of animals on an island. He glanced at the small group gathering, parents holding toddlers, older kids whispering excitedly. He closed his eyes for a moment, then opened them to find hopeful faces looking at him. He read in his clear, steady voice, pausing on each page to let the children take in the bright pictures. He added small questions. What do you think? The parrot will say. The children laughed and shouted answers. Parents leaned in, smiling at the joy in their children's eyes. James felt a warm glow as he turned each page. When he finished, there was a brief silence, followed by enthusiastic applause from kids and adults alike. Sarah clapped too, pride shining in her eyes. She approached James and whispered, "You were wonderful." He felt his cheeks grow warm. "Thank you," he whispered back. Eyes. As more families arrived, James and Sarah worked together. They guided a group of toddlers to a craft table where colorful paper, glue, and stickers waited. Sarah showed a little girl how to stick a paper star, while James helped a boy cut shapes with safety scissors. The children chatted about their favorite animals and made simple but bright collages. Parents snapped photos and joined in the laughter. James watched a shy boy hold up his paper fish with a proud grin. He felt moved by the simple delight of creation. Sarah noticed his gaze and said, "This is what it's all about, giving people small moments of joy." Later, they organized a snack break. Volunteers handed out juice boxes and apple slices. James and Sarah sat at a small table and drank cool apple cider. They watched families chatting in soft voices, sharing parenting tips and community news. A mother with a baby in a sling smiled at James. He waved and she nodded gratefully. Sarah nudged him gently. "Look at this," she said, pointing to a bulletin board filled with thank you notes written by program participants. One note read, "Thank you for helping my daughter learn to read," and another said, "I feel more confident as a parent." James felt tears of happiness prick his eyes. "We really are making a difference," he whispered as the morning moved into midday. The noise dimmed. Families said goodbye, children hugged their parents, and volunteers started to clean up. James and Sarah gathered leftover supplies into boxes. They worked side by side, occasionally sharing a tired but satisfied smile. When the last book was shelved and the last chair stacked, they stood in the empty room, feeling the soft echo of laughter and reading. Sarah stretched and said, "I couldn't have done this without you." James shook his head. "You made it possible. You believed in this project." She looked at him with soft eyes. "You believed in me," she replied. After they locked the doors, James and Sarah stepped into the warm afternoon sun. They walked to a nearby park bench. James took his notebook from his pocket and wrote the day's date at the top of the first empty page. Then he wrote, "Reading our success," and sketched two smiling stick figures beside a stack of books. Sarah watched him and laughed softly, looked up and said, "I want to keep these memories safe." She leaned over his shoulder and said, "Your stories bring them to life." They talked about plans for next month's event. Sarah dreamed of a cooking demonstration for seniors, and James suggested inviting local chefs to teach simple, healthy recipes. They jotted down ideas, laughed at silly suggestions, and felt energized. The sunlight filtered through green leaves above, casting dancing shadows on the ground. Sarah closed her eyes and breathed deeply. "I feel happier than I have in a long time," she said. James smiled, feeling the same warmth inside. As they walked back toward the cafes Sarah owned, James asked her what made her start this work. She paused, thinking, "I wanted to give back," she said at last. "I had great fortune when my business grew, but I remembered how it felt to be alone in those early days. I promised myself, if I ever succeeded, I would help others feel less alone." James nodded. "Your promise changed many lives today," he said quietly. They reached the first cafe, the one where they had first met. The bell tinkled above the door as they entered. The barista greeted them with 2 lattes and a plate of pastries. Sarah paid with a quick nod. They carried their drinks to a table by the window where soft afternoon light shone on their cups. They sipped quietly, savoring the warmth and the story of how they came to be friends and partners. James held his latte and said, "I never imagined that paying for your coffee would lead to this." He smiled at Sarah. She returned the smile and said, "Neither did I, but kindness has a way of growing." They sat in contented silence for a few moments. Then James reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. He showed her a photo he had taken of the bulletin board at the community center, filled with thank you notes. Sarah's eyes filled with tears of joy. "That's exactly why I do it," she said. James leaned back, warmed by the connection they shared. He thought of the shy smiles of the children, the grateful nods of parents, and the laughter that had filled the center. He felt proud to be part of something bigger than himself. Sarah reached across and gently squeezed his hand. "Thank you. For reading, for helping with crafts, and for being you," she said. James squeezed back. "Thank you for trusting me and for showing me what real success can be." They finished their drinks, and the light beyond the window softened into late afternoon glow. James closed his notebook and folded his hands on the table. Sarah stood and offered him her hand. He took it, and they walked out together. Outside, the city buzzed around them, cars passing, people hurrying home, a dog barking in the distance. Yet in that moment, they felt a quiet peace between them. As they turned down the street, James pointed to a small flower stand. "Shall we buy flowers for the center next time?" he asked with a grin. Sarah laughed and nodded. "Great idea." They walked off side by side, ready for the next chapter of their shared story. And as they went, they carried in their hearts the memory of a simple act of kindness that had grown into friendship, community, and hope for many more mornings to come.